Alright, last time we looked at the stratagems, this time we're looking at the weapons. Let's get started. Same disclaimer as the first video. Anything in the already added tier will not be discussed in this video because it's already in Helldivers 2 and that would be pointless. Starting with the Paragon. The Paragon is a burst fire armor piercing rifle that applies a slow on hit. It does a decent amount of damage. It's translated to Helldivers 2. I would anticipate this to be somewhere between the Adjudicator and the Counter Sniper, being higher damaging and lower rate of fire than the Adjudicator, but also faster firing and quicker rate of fire than the Counter Sniper. This one I will put into nice to add. All in all, it doesn't really have a vital niche to slot into. Wouldn't be a bad thing for them to add it, especially if they added trigger modifications so we can get around it being burst fire, which I'm not a huge fan of. Hitting the ground running early on, we have the AR-20L Justice. Take your Adjudicator back. I don't want it. I want this. Give me this. Let me put a drum mag on it if you really feel like doing me a favor. This is my favorite weapon in Helldivers 1. I really want to see it in Helldivers 2. I was very sad that it was not present on launch for Helldivers 2. I was honestly a little bit sad to see the Adjudicator because it made it less likely that this was going to be added. I very much like this weapon. It has a bayonet. It has armor piercing. It has an extended mag. It is extremely fun. This is a workhorse of a weapon. My favorite in the entirety of Helldivers 1 primaries. This one is going into ASAP. It's entirely biased. I don't know what else to say. I use this thing so much in Helldivers 1. I want to be able to use it in Helldivers 2. Next we have the CR9 suppressor. So this thing fires exploding rocket-assisted rounds in fully automatic. The way I would see this working in Helldivers 2 is being kind of like what the Adjudicator is to the Counter Sniper. This would be to the Dominator. So faster firing, fully automatic, less damaging, still medium armor pen. I think it would be pretty decent. It's a fairly fun weapon to use in Helldivers 1, so there's no reason why it wouldn't be just as fun to use in Helldivers 2. I'm going to go ahead and put this one in should be added. It would be nice to have a weapon that's like the Dominator but occupies a different niche so that the Dominator is not just sitting all by itself like it currently is. From a visual variety standpoint alone, I think that would be worth adding. So going to take this time to reiterate that most of my experience with this game was on PlayStation, and so on PC I don't have much of this stuff unlocked. However, I will reassure you that I have used all of this stuff. Now we're looking at the DBS2 Double Freedom. So this one's a bit of a tricky one to look at because we have the long version and the sawed-off version and the version with incendiary rounds. So if we're just looking at the long versus sawed-off, we kind of already do have a sawed-off break-action shotgun in the form of the Bushwhacker, so that could be considered as already in the game. We kind of already have the long version in the form of the double-barreled shotgun that you can just find within missions that's really not good at anything. However, I would say that's a double-barreled shotgun in the game. That is not the Double Freedom in the game. Personally, I would think that the Double Freedom, if added to Helldivers 2, would be more of like an elephant gun type of thing, like 10 gauge or even 8 gauge, very heavy shotgun. Probably give it that incendiary so that it can also do fire damage on top of being a really high damaging load, maybe even medium armor pen, just to compensate even further for the fact that it does only have 2 rounds per reload. But I think that adding a shotgun like that functions the same way in Helldivers 2 as the Double Freedom does within Helldivers 1, I do think that would be a worthwhile addition. Gonna put the Double Freedom in should be added. I think a proper primary that is a double-barreled shotgun that feels similar to how the Double Freedom felt in Helldivers 1 would be a worthwhile addition. The last 12 Tanto. So what the Scythe is for a rifle, the Tanto is for a submachine gun. Closer range, one-handed, decent damage output at the cost of lower range. All in all, between the Scythe as well as the laser pistol that already exists, I don't personally see too much of a niche for this to occupy, especially with it being a continuous beam rather than like the sickle where it's the repeating beam. However, the overheat mechanic in a one-handed primary package is not something we currently have within Helldivers 2. So while I don't think it's vital, I do think that by virtue of it being a one-handed primary laser option, which we do not have in the game at all, it's at least going on the top of nice to add. The Trident. So what the sickle is for a assault rifle, the Trident is to an automatic shotgun. The Trident is pretty decent, especially at clearing hordes. It is ammo independent, which in the first game meant you didn't have to bring a resupply stratagem. In Helldivers 2, that's not really a problem anymore, but still having the ammo be in cells rather than magazines does help help in certain situations. All in all, I think it's novel, it's powerful, it's fun to use. I think the Trident belongs in ASAP. It is fun to use, it is powerful, it is novel, it has a niche that is not currently occupied by any weapon within Helldivers 2 currently. Really a decent option for them to add. Really hope this one does get added. So you may be thinking, wait a minute, isn't the Stalwart already a weapon in Helldivers 2? The Stalwart's a weapon in Helldivers 2 really in name only. In the first game, the Stalwart was a primary weapon that you could bring to bridge the gap between an assault rifle and a machine gun, so you could have something closer to a machine gun without it taking up a stratagem. In Helldivers 2, the Stalwart is a completely different thing. It is a machine gun that is better at dealing with chaff, not as good at dealing with elite enemies and higher, but in Helldivers 2 there is no parallel to what the Stalwart was in Helldivers 1. So, two ways they could do this. Either A, I've heard a lot of people saying to make the Stalwart in Helldivers 2 a primary, just execute it as a stratagem entirely, make it a primary whole cloth. I don't know if necessarily that would be suitable, just because comparing the Stalwart to a Liberator or anything similar of that fully automatic light armor penetrating class, the Stalwart is noticeably more powerful than any of the other options we currently have in the primary slot. So if they were to do that, I think the Stalwart would need some nerfs to compensate. Alternatively, they could just add a squad automatic weapon primary aside from the Stalwart that fulfills the same role as the Stalwart did in Helldivers 1. I think either option would be great. I do think that right now, pretty much the closest thing you can get is a drum magazine fed Liberator or Liberator Penetrator, which is definitely a lot closer than we had at launch, but neither one feels like a true squad automatic weapon. They still both feel like assault rifles, just with bigger magazines, and I would very much like to have something more purpose-built for that sustained suppressing fire role as a primary weapon. As much as I have personal feelings about this, I'm going to put the Stalwart, at least the spirit of the Stalwart, in the bottom of ASAP. I think it would be a very, very good niche for them to add weapons that fill that role better than just having an assault rifle with a drum mag. Having something that is a machine gun primary would be a very, very solid option. Definitely any warbond that they would put that in is a instant buy for me. So just by sheer happenstance, we have the two most complicated answers of the entire tier list right next to each other. So you may be thinking, well, the Peacemaker is already in Helldivers 2. The weapon that's in Helldivers 2 is akin to the entirely stock, unupgraded Peacemaker. However, this weapon does have, in Helldivers 1, the capability for an extended magazine, as well as burst fire, as well as armor-piercing ammunition. So if you look at it like that, the way I see it, you have three logical avenues. Because adding all of this stuff onto the same weapon would be extremely difficult to balance as a secondary without either making it too weak as to the point of being gimmicky or too strong to the point of being overpowered. So how I would see it is you have the stock Peacemaker, which is what we currently have. Then you get a version that has armor piercing, kind of like the same relationship between the Liberator and the Liberator Penetrator. You have the Peacemaker and the quote-unquote Peacemaker Penetrator, where you're not really increasing your damage so much as you're applying that medium armor penetration tag to it, keeping your general magazine size, not reducing that too much, not increasing your damage too much, possibly reducing your amount of total magazines, something that you can still spam like a Peacemaker, but it deals medium armor pen, so you're not solely reliant on having a medium armor pen primary to be able to deal with medium armor enemies. Secondary to that, I would say having a version of the Peacemaker that has the extended mag and the burst fire to kind of act as a halfway point between the Peacemaker and the Redeemer, so that if you want that extra volume of fire, but you also want that added precision, you can kind of have the middle ground between the two. It's not as spammy and high DPS as the Redeemer, but it's also not as slow and accurate as the Peacemaker. I think looking at it through the context of adding a weapon that replicates the medium armor pen, also a weapon that replicates the extended mag burst feature, I think both of those are pretty solid, and thankfully they can be ranked fairly equally. I would put the side grade alternatives to the Peacemaker that mimic its upgrades from Helldivers 1 into the top of nice to add. I think more secondaries would be nice, generally speaking. I think that ideally we should have a fairly equal number of secondaries to primaries. I think that the ratio is a little bit off in that we do have a good deal more primaries than secondaries at the moment, and adding a few more of those would be nice, certainly. The RX-1 Railgun. So there is not currently an equivalent to this in Helldivers 2. There is, of course, the Railgun as a stratagem. This weapon, if added to Helldivers 2, I would picture it as being similar to the Railgun stratagem, but a lighter, weaker version, meant to kind of be that single shot, high damage, but within the envelope of a primary weapon. So kind of picturing it in a similar fashion to how you have the Arc Thrower as a stratagem, and then you have the Arc Blitzer as a primary. You would have the Helldivers 2 current Railgun as a stratagem, and you would have this as a primary. So not the full-on high damage, take out anything nature of the stratagem Railgun, but, you know, maybe give it heavy armor pen in exchange for only having one round. That way, it's not the full-on anti-tank capable stratagem Railgun, but it still invokes that similar feeling within the bounds of what a primary weapon is capable of doing. So the concept of a weaker version of the Railgun to be used as a primary weapon would be a really interesting niche for a primary weapon to occupy, so I'm going to put it in the middle of should be added. I think it would be a very interesting niche. We don't really have anything that is a true blue sniper type weapon in the game. I think a weaker version of the Railgun to be added as a primary would fill that niche nicely. It still wouldn't be stepping on the toes of the Railgun or even the anti-material rifle, because it's still a single shot primary, but it would definitely be unique. It would definitely fill a niche that is not currently filled by any other weapons in the game. Really a solid option for them to add if they so choose. We're just going to ignore the fact that the Punisher's been there the whole time. So the SMG-34 Ninja, finishing off the tier list. This is the only suppressed weapon in Helldivers 1, and therefore would also be the only suppressed weapon in Helldivers 2 if added. This is something that everybody has been asking for since launch. Stealth diving is a very real thing that people do like to do. It is incredibly underserved playstyle relative to how many people actually do it. This is, bar none, the most high demand weapon, I think, generally speaking, could be added to Helldivers 2 at all. People who have not even played Helldivers 1 are asking for what is effectively the Ninja. The Ninja is going into the top of ASAP. We need suppressors in the game. Serve them stealth divers. We definitely need more equipment to serve that play style, given just the overwhelming number of people that do it. So that's the end of the list. As you can see, we have nothing in take it or leave it, and we have nothing in shouldn't add. I think this boils down to how there's more room for interpretation when it comes to how weapons work when porting them over from Helldivers 1 to Helldivers 2 versus how stratagems work, where it's a lot more anticipatable how a stratagem would work if you port it over. Given that the way you shoot is entirely different in both games, there's a lot more room to be had for interpreting what would be good in terms of porting the weapon over, which I think is what has led to a more favorable interpretation. All in all, I think definitely the Ninja really needs to be added. We need suppressed weaponry. We need more stealth equipment. Generally speaking, so much. I could harp on that for goodness knows how long. The Justice, truth be told, if it was sheerly down to practicality and sheerly down to what we already have in Helldivers 2 versus what we don't have from Helldivers 1, this would probably end up in take it or leave it, if I'm being frank. But I can't be purely objective with the Justice. Something that hits hard, kind of like the Adjudicator when it was first added, but just let it have that high recoil, bump up the magazine a bit, tame that dragon, tame that recoil, fire that high damage shot, lay it down in full auto. I think that would be a blast for them to add. The Trident, very interesting weapon. I do like how it uses the heat mechanic for the laser weapons, but it doesn't have the continuous beam. Adding a additional weapon that works like the sickle is always going to be a good thing in my book. The sickle's great. The double sickle's great. The Trident, I think, would also be great. The Stalwart, at least the spirit of the Stalwart, really, I think it's the, other than possibly sniper rifles, I think it's the biggest gap in the current arsenal from a squad logistics standpoint. The fact that you can't really have anything that really properly resembles a machine gun as a primary weapon is, I think, a missed opportunity. Either toning down the Stalwart slightly and then making it a primary, I think that would be great, or just making a whole new weapon purpose-built to be a squad machine gun as a primary weapon. I think that would also be great. Either or, I don't think that adding drum magazines to the assault rifles really was sufficient to occupy this niche. It's definitely better than nothing, but I do think we could get closer to a full-on machine gun primary than what we currently have. Honestly, these videos have really made me hopeful for the future. future of Helldivers 2. I'm glad that they have tied a bulk of their monetization to directly adding new content to the game, and not just new content, but new content that has meaningful place within the game. I think that aspect really makes it more hopeful that a lot of this stuff is going to be added at some point, because hey, they're not going to be making money unless they add more stuff. What better place to look for inspiration than their previous work? It also really highlights how Helldivers 2, despite being a completely different game in terms of how it controls and how it plays, is unmistakably a sequel of Helldivers 1. They really did nail that aspect of, despite how incredibly different everything is, you can still see how things would translate from one game to the other. It really shows that Helldivers 2 is still a sequel. It's not a reboot. It's not a reimagining. It is definitely, to its very core, a sequel of Helldivers 1. And I really do appreciate that.